The Colonel of Colorado, a short story, written by Marcus Lessard, narrated by Dan Stieber. Of all the cities, towns, and boroughs in the state of Colorado, for a colonel to see his lifelong dream come true, where better than Denver? "Gonna kick me some butt in Denver," the colonel said, kicking rocks along sun-drenched Colfax Avenue. Fastening the belt holding up his worn pair of army fatigue pants, the colonel recalled that guy in Greeley who had advised him a year earlier along the lines of, "Denver's a real metropolis, Mr. Colonel, sir. Got any number of day labor gigs, so plenty of competition, which I know is what you're looking for. You'll win big in Denver. Ever your quest to become the Colonel of Colorado leads you down that ways." Strolling along the weed-infested sidewalk, his smile fading, his face reddening, the colonel mused. That worthless, stupid, grinning ex-Navy with all the tats had sounded like an honest-to-goodness travel agent when he'd said all that crap about this place. Ended up having to eliminate that dirtbag. That shut him up. The colonel felt grim satisfaction worm its way through his veins. His memories, like a heart, muscled the surge. He was finally in the mile-high city, knapsack on his back, and trekking along a busy sidewalk to meet his next elimination, the man they called Roscoe. The colonel halted at the crosswalk. His head spun, his vision blurred. He looked up and around. He squinted the afternoon sun out of his eyes. He recalled those doctors who had advised him that to see the world in his way was a symptom of PTSD. However, he saw it as a tactical advantage that helped him with his gaming, kept him sharp and on task. He saw a field of battle, the chess pieces arrayed in combat position, with wave upon wave of business-attired pedestrians marching to the battlefront, some communicating into handheld devices that looked to be smartphones, but which the man in the army fatigues knew were walkie-talkies. These pedestrian foot soldiers stood in contact with an adversary spearheaded by a modern-day cavalry. Legions of counter-advancing, fast-pedaling cyclists, many wearing fanny packs around their waists, and that the man in the army fatigues knew zippered over grenades and extra ammo. He noticed, too, the columns of armored vehicles, the SUVs, minivans, and 18-wheelers that motored along Colfax Avenue. And although he couldn't say with certainty to which side these vehicles belonged, if he had to guess, he would have said these were Viet Cong owned and operated, judging by the Russian inscriptions on the vehicles' flanks. They were probably Soviet T-54s. The art of war was like the game of life, the colonel conceded. As he breathed deep the roadside fumes, one could expect it to be neither puzzle-perfect nor altogether poetic. Still, it all seemed so chaotic, so helter-skelter to him, as he beheld this metropolitan mayhem playing out before him, his brain registering every high-heeled football, every business suit, every Denver Bronco cap, every burst of machine gun fire, every explosion, every shrapnel-torn body, and the many bloodied dead. What the warring factions of Denver need, the colonel leveled his brow, is a leader, a colonel, to help make the game simpler. Simpler, like lining up peasant villagers and then watching them fall. The colonel stretched a grin. Simple is as simple does, he spat and laughed out loud, resuming his prowl along Colfax Avenue, every step delivering him closer to his next elimination. He noticed the 24-hour Liquor Mart sign splashed over top one of the storefronts across the street. "Where I'll stop over after the deed is done," the colonel mumbled. The colonel felt well indeed. Truth be told, today was the day that he planned to adopt, assuming he played his pieces right, the awe-inspiring title of the Colonel of Colorado, to add to his collection of other lesser titles: Colonel of Breckenridge, Colonel of Estes Park, Colonel of Trinidad, and Colonel of 101 other Colorado locales. Those words which so often he had read, in their upteenth variation, appeared finally, paint-brushed onto the lone window of the two-story brick eyesore situated dead ahead. Day labor workers needed, the sign advertised. His adrenaline surging, the colonel hastened his pace. He crossed Colfax Avenue ignoring as he clapped both heels against pavement, the honking horns, squealing brakes, and drivers of Lexuses hollering at him to watch his raggedy-ass step. The colonel had neither time nor inclination for begging anyone's pardon. He pressed on, conquering curb to reclaim the sidewalk. Soon he was standing in front of the unadorned brick building of his dreams, reaching for the doorknob, discovering its screws to be loose, and liking it. He broke into that trademark chant that had become his fight song. Colonel, Colonel, Bobernal, Banana, Fana, Fofernal, Fee, Fi, Fofernal, Colonel. Reaffirming that his knapsack still hung off his shoulder with a quick tug of its strap, he pushed open the front door, then walked inside. Nice, the colonel thought, as he scored a look around. Spartan, sure, and smells like Fat Man armpit, but aren't all day labor agencies pretty much hellholes in need of a wrecking ball? At least the walls had paint on them to cover over the black mold stains. He coursed a path across the dusty cement floor, then stepped to the reception counter. The dispatcher on the other side of the sliding glass window appeared rather too absorbed in George Clooney to notice. Finally, she pressed a button on her remote control, and the screen went soundless. Want on the list? She asked through the glass. Name's Lou, tenant. The man in the army-fatigued pants said. Course I wants on the list. What do you think I came here for? The damned scenery? A hobo, standing off to the side, cleared his chest of some of its phlegm. You's, he said, a lieutenant, mister? The colonel's lip twitched. I am, he said, not venturing to look over, lest he be belted by Bacardi breath. You and your friends, though, will be wantin' to call me colonel. His eyes grew large. And that's not a suggestion, soldier. That's an order. The hobo turned all sunshine as the light of understanding hit him. He stepped backward in fear, indifference, in wonder, to give the colonel the wide berth the colonel deserved. The dispatcher droned. You're gonna have to fill out an application then, Mr. Tenant, seeing how you're new here. She passed over pen and paper. The colonel accepted the standard issue items. He proceeded to fill out the application. Day labor agencies, he reminded himself as he scrawled profanities and random bastardized philosophical and religious maxims in the entries on the form, almost never checked work references. They were ex-con friendly. And above all, they hardly raised an eyebrow, let alone a ruckus, at certain clients who had once shot in cold blood countless hundreds of innocent villagers. The dispatcher noticed that Mr. Tennant's ID was as fake as a peel-on tattoo. She didn't care. We offer big lunches, she said, to those lucky enough to get out on a ticket. The colonel had come for one reason, and one reason only, and it wasn't to work. Ham? He asked, merely for conversation's sake. Nah, the dispatcher answered, taking a drag from her cigarette. Just the usual baloney. The colonel motioned to hand over the completed application. As soon as the dispatcher reached for it, he snatched it back. He fixed his gaze upon the dispatcher. His eyeballs swam in their sockets, his eyelids blinking frenetically. He went into a full stare mode. The dispatcher drew back, her eyes widening. Her cheek twitched. The colonel hardened his googly-eyed stare. He reminded himself that twitchy cheeks were muscle spasms triggered by stress hormones, which was to suggest that the old gal was stressing out, which was to suggest that she would give him the information that he needed. The dispatcher said, a bit breathlessly, Are you going to keep staring at me all crazy like that, or are you going to give me your application? Her voice still working, though, the colonel thought, and with no tonal aberration. And her focus is on the application, not on her fear of the psycho stare. That means she's in control. It means she's friggin' task-oriented, and so she probably won't break the rules about client confidentiality by giving me with the information that I want as a way to get me to leave. Damn. The colonel looked down at her keyboard. He smiled. Anyway, her finger's missing its ring, but still has the imprint of a ring on it. And a girlie with a lonely heart is a girlie open to encounters and adventure, and who might be impressed upon. He flitted a look up at the TV screen. Also, she's watching George Clooney, which likely is putting her neurotransmitters into an excitable and highly suggestible state. The colonel returned his face to its everyday pose, his eyeballs relaxed. He shifted from one foot to the other. "I'm looking for someone," he said in his best attempt at sounding pedestrian. "My next challenger. Name's Roscoe. You think Roscoe might show up today? Interested parties want to know. Please." The dispatcher hesitated. From personal experience, she knew it was oftentimes best not to divulge information about clients, and especially when the interested party looked as Frankenstein as this one did. "Roscoe? What, you a friend of his or something? You don't look like no friend of Roscoe's. You don't look like no friend of nobody's." The man in the army fatigues stood his ground. The dispatcher looked him up and down. Finally, she smiled. "You're probably as batty as my cat Loki, which he hops in the back seat of my Chevy Cavalier. But at least you know how to say please, and got a body that looks like it can maybe work hard labor, which can't be said for most of the wieners in this joint." She sighed. "Roscoe, sure. He usually stops by for his paycheck at 4. Pull up a chair, why don't you? And pop a squat in our roach-free waiting area. Can't promise you'll get out on a ticket." The dispatcher, seizing the remote, returned to her movie. The colonel clicked his heels and did an about face. With amusement, he scanned the day hall area. All the while his thoughts kept tab. This is confirmation. My sources then had been correct. 4 o'clock. He gets here. That's when it all goes down. Here, regiment headquarters, or what the locals in lower rank and file referred to as Hideaway Hall, so called for its strategic location nestled deep inside the Dalat Highlands, well out of reach of Soviet sighted scopes and wholly secure from Viet Cong raids. The chairs, the colonel noticed, as he continued to scan the premises, were aligned in neat, straight rows. They appeared to be of cheap polyethylene construction, hardly befitting the well-toned posterior of a colonel. Yet, since sitting down was how the fated deed was to be done, the colonel supposed that he should try and find one. There, 3rd row from the back, not 2 paces away from that MP with the M16 slung over his shoulder, standing guard in front of General Walkenhoff's office. The colonel walked over, sat down. He unslung his knapsack, lowered it down onto the cement floor. A plume of dust kicked up in protest. "Patience," he reassured the knapsack, petting it. "Just 10 minutes to go, and then you can come out and play." His bloodshot eyes resuming their scan, he noticed the individual seated to his left, a gangly, weather-beaten scarecrow of a man who looked to be all sticks and wire beneath his holey t-shirt. His calloused fingers kept so true to their task of folding homemade cigarettes that the man failed to notice his new neighbor and the snide look he kept stealing over. Cigarettes, although desirable otherwise, did not interest the colonel at this particular moment in time, which was 7 minutes till impact. He turned to survey the 3 dozen or so worthless artifacts who filled the day hall with their stink, smoke, and small-minded chatter, and who would soon bear witness to the fated elimination of the colonel's next victim. The colonel quavered, but where to after that? East Coast? West Coast? Worry about that afterward, he assured himself. The usual entourage of bums, prostitutes, drug addicts, vagabonds, gangsters. The colonel made note. None too bright-looking. Good-sized crowd, though, he had to admit. The colonel was quick to remind himself that he was the away team. "Cigarette?" The individual to the colonel's left blurted, offering one of his fold jobs. The colonel denounced Scarecrow and his filthy-fingered offering with muttered profanity. This was business, not a social call. Scarecrow was, however, deaf in one ear and mistook the profanities for compliments on his product. "Ah, thank ya," he gushed. "Yes, I do roll 'em up tight and clean, don't I? Never buy packs. Always fold 'em up myself." He offered a sample. "Want one? Don't know ya, but I can tell right proper that you're a brother." This word, brother, it brought back memories of the war. The colonel pushed the invasive, blood-curdling images from his mind. Death, dying, and people clamoring for others to die. Inwardly, the colonel wanted to scream, and so he did, and with all that was in him. The peanut gallery of crusty, curiosity-stricken faces that turned to look were met with the newcomer's middle finger and promises to make. Each and every one of you is a suffer. Should even one of yous attempt to come to the rescue of that little retard, the colonel sneered. Now turn around. They did. Each returned to his or her checkers game, newspaper, cigarette, nap, crossword puzzle. The colonel felt better. He always did after screaming, and drinking, and winning, which was often. No, it was always. Listen up, peoples! Everyone rubbernecked. The television in the staff room was no longer blaring, which meant that the dispatcher had an announcement to make. Cyril Perkins! The shrill voice of the dispatcher echoed to the ends of the day hall. Dishwashing job. West Side. 5-hour ticket. Cyril Perkins! A derelict, recognizable, unshowered youth in the second row who sported dreadlocks and a marijuana leaf imprint on the front of his t-shirt, and who was evidently Cyril Perkins, stood on cue and hastened to the front counter. There he was handed a work ticket and a big lunch. The colonel scowled. Nourishing bologna sandwiches you're given, he said, shaking his head. To some peace-loving hippie and his pet fleas. Head still careering with displeasure, the colonel was able to relax himself into a pseudo-meditative state with hopes to regain the focus that this long-haired lollipop and his pet fleas had quite stolen from him, and in preparation for those prime-time moments which were to come. He closed his eyes, drew a breath, and then let it out, long and slow. But then, "You look awfully familiar," Scarecrow said, peering in. "Do I know you from somewhere, brother?" The colonel didn't answer. He stayed fused to his private moment reflection, even though these words had been spoken directly at his face from not 3 feet away. Scarecrow cleared his throat. "Hello there, fella," he grinned. "My name is—" The colonel flung his eyes open. "Can it, Scarecrow? Something historic's about to happen, and I need time and space to think." Popularity, fame, and adoring public were burdens that the colonel were ever forced to have to endure as a result of his larger-than-life exploits, his hundreds of eliminations. Attending to the whims of his public was, however, not something that the colonel ever let get in the way of business, and especially not here, with less than 5 minutes till impact. "Away!" The colonel shooed his arm at the other man. "No autographs, please." Slumping resignedly back into his polyethylene roost, Scarecrow, with a sigh, skidded a cigarette under his lip. Soon afterwards, he rose from his seat. "Gonna get me a drink of water." The colonel placed ever so gently his knapsack atop the vacated chair. The dust-layered clock on the wall read 3:58, 2 minutes till impact. Electric with the energies of anticipation, the colonel all of a sudden wanted to offer up a chant. He sang, "Colonel, Colonel, Bo-Bernal, Banana Fana, Fo-Fernal, Fee-Fi-Fo." Dude, a young voice at great peril to its young owner said from somewhere nearby, "Like the army outfit." The colonel swiveled his neck around to level his sights upon the sorry fool who had dared interrupt the banana song. With the exception of the bovine stare, the colonel could see in every other sweat-shined feature on the tattooed young face the reflection of his one and only, all-consuming past, present, and future dream. The face was that of a youngster, a kid, as he had then been when shot up those villagers, fearless, steady. The kid held out a cigarette. The colonel accepted the cigarette. "I'm looking for someone, bro. Name's Roscoe. You know anyone round here by that name?" "Roscoe Jarvis, you mean?" "Could be. I'll know him when I see him." The kid grinned. "Course. Roscoe Jarvis is hella weird looking." The kid started. His grin broadened. "And what do you know? There he is." The colonel followed the kid's gaze to the reception counter. The colonel mused as he sized up the odd couple who had just walked in and were now signing in at the reception counter and schmoozing it up with the dispatcher. Correction. It was a chaperone of sorts who did all the schmoozing and signing. His fleshy right arm wrought so pale and plumpish as to look like an oversized bratwurst. The colonel tried to see beyond the bratwurst arm, but couldn't, so he tried to hear beyond it through the clamor of the day hall. He honed in from the voice resounding from up front, which sounded like it might belong to the Munchkin mayor from The Wizard of Oz. "Ha! Course you can inhale ground cumin!" the voice of the Munchkin mayor exclaimed. "Can inhale most anything 'cept your own finger." "It's him," the colonel confirmed. "And he's talking to the wall. Him. Proposed victim, number 452. A 5-foot-tall hunchback named Roscoe Jarvis with a Munchkin voice and the words Lakewood Elementary School striped across his shirt, and who exhibited without shame that telltale demented look of decades sleeping in the shade of a Chinese restaurant dumpster. Hunchbacked, demented-looking, sporting a t-shirt and bibbed overall ensemble that probably once belonged to a 9-year-old and purchased at the Salvation Army? Even so, this twerp was supposedly a genius. Might this little one, the colonel wondered, prove as difficult an elimination as that pimp in Aurora, the bag lady down in the Springs, the coke dealer down in Pueblo? The answer, probably even more so, but no matter. The colonel stood to his feet. He hollered, "Hey, Roscoe Jarvis, it's showtime." All voices and sounds in the day hall ground to a halt. 36 sets of eyes divided glancing between Roscoe and the newcomer. I'll fight. But Roscoe just kept right on talking to his wall. "Roscoe's not allowed to talk to strangers, mister." The kid craned his neck to advise. "If you want to get in touch with him, the best way," he nodded toward the front, "would be to first speak with his chaperone. See that guy over there? That big, round, doughy looking." "Hey, doughboy." The chaperone up at the counter winced, and hard. "That's right. I'm talking to you. Tell Munchkin Land over there he's being paged." However, the chaperone was hardly the type to engage scary-looking strangers. Finally, after repeated catcalls and a litany of animal noises volleyed in his direction by the stranger, the chaperone turned and in a lecturing voice answered, "Dinner at the Maple Street Mission begins at 4:30, FYI. It's a SpaghettiO night, and Roscoe will be needing to take his meds before having his SpaghettiOs. We get our checks, then we gotta scat so we can make it in time for SpaghettiOs. SpaghettiOs are Roscoe's favorite." "Yeah," a crankly voice added. "If I don't take my medication by 4:30, I'll keel over like a little penguin, one high on crack. It'll be my poison hemlock moment, a la Socrates. And then instead of a band of demons like in that movie Ghost, little toga men with names like Sextus will rush forth to escort me to my new underworld, love domicile. Oh, home, home, a home at last." The colonel said, "I have a proposition to make, doughboy." But the chaperone wasn't interested in propositions, rather in the forthcoming checks. He turned his back on what looked and smelled like trouble. "Hey, stupid." The whole place went quiet. The little man himself stood with wide eyes. "That goes for the little hunchback, too. Moreover, the little hunchback." A bearded man of considerable brawniness, seated by the main entrance and who looked to be a member of the Disciples' biker gang, judging by the tattoo on his thick forearm that stated as much, stood to his feet, in a baritone tenor as imposing as the flourishing physicality of the man himself. The bearded man bellowed, "Call him weird, call him crazy, but don't you ever, ever call Roscoe Jarvis stupid." "I'll call him whatever I damn well please," the colonel fired back, adding in a dampened tone. "Says the soon-to-be colonel of Colorado, and yours truly." The day hall erupted in response. "It's the colonel! The colonel! He's here!" Each then patting themselves on the back for their own outrageously good fortune. The collective mass of loiterers, no longer patting, but pushing for front row, repositioned their chairs into a makeshift semicircle around the man who claimed to be the one and only, the colonel. "Ah, so they've heard of me," the colonel sang, unzipping his knapsack and manhandling out its much-to-be-feared contents. "Who is it, Colonel? Which one of us is gonna get it?" He leveled his middle finger into a pointing gesture. "Little hunchback. Munchkin Land. Him. No less than 20 sets of arms reached to lay hold upon Roscoe Jarvis and delivered him up to the colonel, who, as always, first went the way of politeness. Listen, Ward of Doughboy, there's no escaping me, okay? No doubt you'll be causing yourself a world of hurt if you decide not to cooperate. Understood? The congregated masses waited in breathless silence for the reply, in which turned out to be the following. Surely the gods have come down to me, little Roscoe. Roscoe blew his nose into his shirt. Why, I'd be happy to sink your battleship, your colonelship, and your cruiser, and your submarine, and your carrier, a voice from the peanut gallery put in. Destroyer, offered another. Yeah, said Roscoe, offering the colonel his hand. The colonel answered, These be the only things that I shake, friend, as he drew salt and pepper shakers out of his knapsack, and then the battleship game pads with their plastic piece ships, submarine, destroyer, aircraft carrier, cruiser, to a resounding cheers from the crowd with scattered commentaries like, Hells yeah, and It's game time, homies. After your goose is cooked, the colonel grinned roguishly, showcasing salt and pepper shakers. I'm gonna eat it. Shall we begin? And so they began their game of battleship, and with the not to be overlooked, misinterpreted, nor understated agreement that the winner be bequeathed the most honorific title, Colonel of Lower Downtown, Master over all its layers, liars, and loony bins, Lord over all its lagoons, legumes, and legionnaires, best of the best, I've done it. I'm Colonel, certified. The challenger granted himself the privilege of going first. He honed in on his opponent. His eyelids fluttered. He pursed his lips as his face began to twitch, spasm, redden. His eyes flew open, the enlarged, red, tremoring eyes bearing down on Roscoe, as would a tiger readying to pounce upon prey. All the while Roscoe chewed at his yellowish fingernails and mumbled something about peanut butter. The colonel grunted. D5, he said. Wait a minute, stop! Mobley Smith, janitor, took a step forward. What's all this colonel nonsense? Mobley decried. Battleship's a naval game. There be no colonels in the Navy, right? A consensus of nodding heads affirmed that this was so. The colonel smacked his fist into his hand. Such things, he said, will not be said again. He reared back. Got it? Silence reigned. Everyone had gotten it. Well, most everyone. Give him hell, Roscoe! A voice jeered. Beat the colonel! The colonel gasped. He wheeled his sights around the day hall. The heckler, the insurrectionist, would no doubt have to be punished, if only he could be found. The colonel squelched the immediate urge he had to wail on someone, anyone, mercilessly, even until they acknowledged that he, and he alone, the colonel to end all colonels, was deserving of a statue chiseled into his likeness, buffed by the mayor himself, kissed by all citizens, and, yes, a statue. The colonel shook off the goosebumps. D5. He repeated his choice of move. Miss! His opponent chirped, and so the contest was underway, with D7, B3, A6, H9 all misfiring in turn. The crowd oohed. The crowd awed. However, not everyone reveled in their role as spectator. To the rear of the main action, a transient lady of indeterminate age who paid for her dope habit by way of shady dealings with the menfolk, and whom the others referred to as Miss Mess, real name Melissa, but which seemed less fitting, turned to Mobley Smith, janitor. Just as Roscoe Jarvis scored a direct hit on the colonel's submarine, she asked Mobley, who was in the process of attaching mop head to handle, why it was that this colonel guy, during the course of the battleship contest, kept staring all crazy-like at his opponent. He be studyin', be dissectin', that poor little inbred, Mobley answered, looking up from his mop head to answer the female face with its telltale mask of rogue and wrinkle. He added, as he closed the door of the janitor's closet, it's been said that men have gone blind and insane from that stare. They call it the colonel's psycho stare. Yep, it's how we always be winning. Never lost a single match. Mobley slapped the soapy wetness of the mop onto a cement floor that had more crack in it than a Northside Denver neighborhood. E4! The far-off, warbly voice of Roscoe rang out. Someone announced, "He sunk the Colonel's submarine." Mobley went on to explain for Miss Mess. The psycho stare, first off, is of course meant to psych the opponent out. Me? I'd be so psyched out I'd be calling the popo if I looked over and saw eyes like that bearing down on me. And I never call the popo. But also, that stare, with it, the Colonel, he be able to analyze the facial and nonverbal cues of his opponent. And by studying them with the psycho stare, that's how the Colonel wins all his matches. Mobley set them up aside. Takes these games super serious too. Like they's life or death. Mobley shrugged. No one knows why. Miss Mess thanked the janitor for his time and intel with a lipsticky kiss. Deciding that she would have to miss her 5 o'clock at the Sidewinder Motel, she found a chair at the back of the makeshift semicircle, then sat down. What was it that Miss Mess saw? What appeared to be Roscoe Jarvis's complete immunity to the psycho stare? His appearing to have, in fact, at his disposal, a whole arsenal of mind games and psychouts all his own. Roscoe at one point stared up at the ceiling and recited the following. "And now the two armies at last, each under its own leaders. The Trojans raised a loud din and clamor like a huge flock of birds, so you may hear cranes honking." And so the recital carried on for another 5 or 6 brutal minutes. Finally, it ended. A few in the audience applauded. Others swore in amazement. "The Iliad," the chaperone clarified in an exasperated voice. "Look, guys, the Maple Street mission. We really gotta get back. I didn't think this game would be lasting so long." The whole assembly just blinked at him. "He'll fall over dead, guys. I'm serious. Come on, Roscoe, we gotta go." "I ain't going." "We have to, Ross, or you'll, die." But Roscoe at that moment cared not at all about any pink tablet, 100 milligram dithprenol, nor about his hemorrhaging pancreas, which had every intention of bleeding him into the afterlife if he missed so much as a single dose. Chin up, Roscoe declared. "Besides, I still got my emergency backup right here." He patted the backside jeaned pocket of his Oshkosh Bagosh overalls. The chaperone stood blinking. Narrowing his eyes, he said, "Wait, I thought you told me that emergency pill you'd wrapped up in your bubblegum fell out of your pocket on the bus ride to Goodwill yesterday." Roscoe started, lips pursing, face reddening. He hopped up from his seat, then tore into his shirt like a wrestler. "You just want to steal little hunchback's fun, don't you?" His hand whipped out, obscene gesture making its afternoon debut. "Keep little hunchback from doing something good for himself." Roscoe flailed his arms in the air. "Oh, how happy, how fulfilled little hunchback will be if only he could sink the Colonel of the Western Hemisphere's unsinkable Titanic. Hee-ha-ha-ha!" "That's not it at all, and you know it." "Colorado," the Colonel corrected, standing to his feet. "Soon to be the Colonel of Colorado. I haven't won the entire Western Hemisphere yet. Now, as for you..." He turned to the chaperone, submerging a finger into the pincushion that was the man's shoulder. "Guess you're not aware of your little buddy here's got stuck in his throat more than just a Greek mythology audiobook. Got secrets in there, too. Told me he's skipping taking his medication before, and plenty of times." "Roscoe? Really?" Roscoe hesitated. Yeah. I skipped before and was, yeah." "See?" The Colonel sat back down. "All right, where were we?" He stroked his chin stubble. "Ah, yes, I remember. A3. That's my next move."
"Miss."
Roscoe beamed. The chaperone checked in with his wristwatch. He stood to his feet. "Ross, if you're wondering where I'm going," he said, heavy steps in the direction of the door. "It's back to the mission. To get for you one of those tablets you keep saying tastes like lifesavers. Get it? Lifesavers? As in yummy yummy? I'm gonna live to see tomorrow? Loser!" Roscoe shouted at the window, at the retreating figure outside of it. He crossed his arms, planted his feet.
"Ain't nobody gonna call me stupid,"
he declared. Moments later, Roscoe Jarvis sank the colonel's aircraft carrier. "Damn," the colonel wailed, pounding his fist. Everywhere across his gamepad, he saw red. Never in all his years has he faced an opponent with so many idiosyncrasies. The idiot remarks, the monkey faces, the celebrity impressions, the singing, the skewed body language. It all was so damned irregular, and all whizzed past him in the impossible-to-read roadmap of his opponent's next move. The colonel delayed, cursed. He tried everything, but at the hour mark was down an inconceivable 5 ships to 2. However, the colonel was not one to lose heart easily. Finally, he noticed one latecomer, persistent pattern that he thought might lead to a breakthrough. The colonel grinned. "See how he's leaning himself over to the side like that?" he said, sufficiently flustered to break his rule about sharing his secrets of the trade. "It's a defense mechanism, grounded in the principles of entropy. His pieces are all on one side of the board, so he leans in the other direction to make his body feel uncluttered, and to give also his left arm freedom of movement. The pudwhacker's left-handed, clear as day." Sneering, the colonel hollered over, "You're telling on yourself, fool. F1. "Miss," Roscoe said. The colonel's eyes bulged, then narrowed. "What?" "Time out," Roscoe said, grimacing. He rose from his seat. "Gotta go to the bathroom." He scurried off with a hand held to his side. Silence entered the day hall. Moments later, the dispatcher announced she had 2 tickets for a day job at the Denver Post, assembling newspapers. There were no takers. No one dared to leave their seat, nor move, nor light a cigarette. All eyes stayed on the one who called himself, whom they all called, Colonel, whose own eyes stayed on the gamepad in front of him, the wheels of his mind spinning with strategy. However, the colonel couldn't help but grow unnerved by the presence of the many whom out of the corner of his eye kept ogling him. From personal experience, however, he had discovered that when cornered, it was oftentimes easiest and less messy to just answer whatever idiot fan mail they had for him. Flinging his sights up, he blurted, "All right, damn it. Ask your 20 questions. Let's get this over with." Eyes all over the day hall exchanged glances. The atmosphere of fear-filled silence gradually gave way to one of charged anticipation. If only someone dared go first. Colonel?" The meek petition was sent forth. Hi. My name's Jack. Jack Schmaltz. Big fan. Thank you for all that you've done." Jake gulped. "Don't know if you remember, but I was there the day up in Fort Collins, about 3 months ago, when you just annihilated that heroin dealer with the—" "Your question?" intoned the colonel, anger lines streaking his forehead. "What is it, please?" "My question. Right. So, have you really played battleship games at every day labor place in the state of Colorado? And not even lost once?" The colonel sighed. "All except this place." Miss Mess arose from her seat in the back. "Hi there, Colonel," she said. "What's up? I'm like your newest, biggest fan. I have a question, too." The colonel twisted a devilish grin at this lipsticked cutie with the leather miniskirt. "So, I've been asking round here, and all my peoples be bragging on you. They say, too, that every time you beat someone there is to beat in all the labor agencies in a place, like, say, Pueblo, you start calling yourself the Colonel of Pueblo. Beat all of the battleshippers in Aspen. Whammo, you be the Colonel of Aspen. And so now, if you win here today, you'll be, I get it, the Colonel of Colorado. Seeing as how you've bested all the best in the whole state of Colorado, so where off to next, then? Nevada, maybe? I used to work Las Vegas, if you're wondering." Miss Mess flashed a smudgy smirk. "That's my question." The colonel returned gaze to his gamepad. He muttered, "Vegas, Nevada, Pockets of murmur all across the day hall broke out in response to this news update. Nevada, that's where the colonel will be off to next. From behind the curtain that was the colonel's overhangings of hair issued forth the words, "To win, I simply go where the losers are at." The colonel smiled. "Which is everywhere." "Everywhere?" a rackety voice echoed. "The losers are." Even in Lo Ting. Lots of losers over in Lo Ting. The colonel shuddered. He let out a gasp. He looked up. Surprised? The rackety voice inquired. Oh, but why not let's tell him the truth, Colonel? You ain't no colonel, only a lieutenant. Name of Jeffrey S. Peterson. The colonel grimaced at the weather-beaten face that belonged to this man who had at some point padded from his spot over by the water fountain to his present position in front of the soda machine. The colonel spat, right on the floor. It was Scarecrow. I thought, the colonel sneered, I'd taken care of you earlier. You've taken care of far too many of us humans already, Lieutenant Peterson. Fortunately, I was never one of your, as they say, missings in action. The colonel stood to his feet, slowly, joints popping. Say that name again, homeboy. It'll be more than just a drink you'll be needin'. My name's Colonel. I am Colonel. 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 Do you hear me? The colonel clenched back his rage, lest it go volcanic. He unfurled his fist, breathed in and out. Scarecrow announced to the day hall. This man was once a soldier. Back in Nam, no doubt. A voice fired back. Scarecrow smiled. He had 2 teeth. That's right. Ah, but your colonel was hardly that. A lieutenant. Rather big-time reputation, what, with his tactical brilliance at the battles of Loc Ninh and Lo Jiang. But never a colonel. Scarecrow hesitated. He glanced over at the army legend, who, 40 years and 40,000 beers later, looked more like wasteland than war hero. I'd remember that face anywhere. Lieutenant Jeffrey S. Peterson, dishonorably discharged. Photo in every journal, gazette, periodical, scandal sheet that Saigon News racks had to offer. Say it, the colonel demanded. Excuse me? Tell them, damn it. Tell them. The colonel's eyes blazed with a fire that the passage of 4 decades of time had failed to quench. Scarecrow stood stock still. The colonel said, All right, then I'll tell them. He blared, Listen up, in full and graphic detail, and that the consensus agreed incorporated many quite unnecessary and overwrought references to blood and gore. The colonel, over the 10 minutes that followed, went on to explain about the villagers he had lined up, then leveled with his M16 automatic rifle, like so many ducks in a row, about how he had in fact volunteered for the job in order to impress his superior officers so that they would make him colonel, so that they would promote him from his low-life lieutenant to colonel. He wanted so badly to be colonel, and so that he could finally be somebody. His monologue concluded. The colonel belted out a long and impassioned string of expletives. Then he lowered his head and was silent. Scarecrow offered, and the word around camp was they would have made him colonel too, had he not in the meantime gone insane. Grinning, the colonel shook his head. You should have seen the expressions on they faces, Scarecrow, when the first of them bullets hit 'em. Rat-tat-tat went my AR. Then boo-hoo-hoo went those commie peasants. Then the peasants were lying face down in the mud, all quiet-like, blood everywhere. Boo-hoo-hoo, the colonel said, sniggering. Ah, that was classic. He looked far off. And then I saw the smug, smirky faces of my superior officers. I knew right then and there I was headed for the big time. The colonel cleared his throat. He leveled his reddened eyes at Scarecrow. Insane is as insane does, he said. I'm just here to get mine, and will. He reared back. Once Roscoe Jarvis gets off his potty break. Still the door to the restroom remained irreconcilably shut. No response, yet forthcoming from its occupant. Sensing his cue, Mobley Smith, janitor, wasted no time to hightail it over to the restroom, to be joined there by a small throng of others. Mobley knocked, called out Roscoe's name, then waited some more. Mobley opened the door, which had not been locked. He and the others chanced steps inside. Well, the colonel called over. No answer. The dispatcher up at the reception counter, with head out of her window, called over. Ah, come on, guys. He's just in there reading his newspaper. Sits in there and memorizes the thing. Does it all the time. The janitor hobbled out of the restroom, head lowered, pale, pitiful looking almost as the day hall itself. "No pulse," he said flatly. "What do you mean, no pulse? He's dead?" "No pulse." The Colonel of Colorado didn't need an autopsy report, nor a confirmation signature from the deceased. It was over. Mission accomplished. He pumped a fist in the air. Winner. By default? No, by knockout. Folding up his beloved battleship, snuggling it back into his knapsack, and with a smile stretched so broad that it hurt, the Colonel of Colorado pondered where he might be off to next. Arizona? California? Nevada? The Colonel of the Las Vegas Strip sure had a funnish ring to it. The voice of the janitor blared. "Quick, someone get my mop. Got a pool of blood in here." "Someone call the popo," yelped Miss Mess. The voice of the janitor. "Looks like he be bumping his little noggin on the sink when he fell over. Blood streaking down the sink, dripping onto the floor," the voice said weakly. "My God, it's everywhere." The Colonel crooked a smile. Blood. Everywhere. How fitting. And no less delighted was the crowd. The whole house was so amped up with cheer, so ecstatic for their hero, the Colonel. Notwithstanding his bloodied, dead adversary lying cats up in the restroom, that few could resist bum rushing over to congratulate him. The Colonel of Colorado, with a pat on the back or a handshake. "I'll sure miss little Roscoe," the burly bearded biker said, extending a hand. "But choosing to pass on his meds like that was pretty stupid, wasn't it? And you are just plain awesome, mister." The Colonel, oblivious to it all, as if in a daze, began to put one foot in front of the other, the mass of celebrants breaking rank like Red Sea waters to allow him passage, closing in on the door which led out of the building. The Colonel suddenly halted. He clicked his heels together. He pivoted to his left, paused, saluted, exchanged pleasantries that included the benediction. "Thank you, sir," and shook hands with thin air, walked a few steps, pivoted to his right, smiled, shook hands, and exchanged a complimentary phrase or two with nothingness, or so it appeared. Invisible congratulants, one after the other, all lined up on either side of him in columns that stretched all the way to the door. "What in the sweet name of Mary Magdalene is Colonel doing?" Miss Mess said, defying the lingering silence. The lineup, each man with a respective congratulatory greeting for the Colonel. Roll called as follows. Lieutenant Smith, handshake, salute. Lieutenant Tolman, handshake, salute. Major Merriman, firm handshake, salute. Colonel Castiglio, handshake, sweaty palm, salute. Major Frome, handshake, big smile, salute. And when the square-jawed, blonde, crew-cutted General Walkenhoff stretched forth a Thor-like forearm to extend congratulations, the Colonel fairly shook with pride. Then, when the General pinned the stripes of Colonel upon his lapel and pronounced before all of the great men the benediction, "Lieutenant, son, you've earned this. If we had 20 more just like you, there'd be no more Viet Cong left to fight." The Colonel found himself having to fight back tears. For the first time in a long time, maybe ever, the Colonel felt good about himself. Really good. And surely that accounted for something. No, it was everything. The Colonel pressed a sweaty palm up against a beveled cedar entryway of Hideaway Hall and, pushing the heavy wood door open, took his first step out of the board game realm of one against one and into the real-world realm of one against all. A storm had since moved in, unusual for central Colorado in the summer months, and although the winds gusted him this way and that, and the hail pelted his beloved knapsack, what pelted him hardest as he made a brisk glide along Colfax Avenue was the realization that although he was now indeed the Colonel of Colorado, there were 49 other states that he was not the Colonel of, and the further his feet could carry him, the more these other states mocked him. By the time he wanged open the glass door to the 24-hour liquor mart, the Colonel of Colorado was no longer smiling. He slapped his case of Coors down on the checkout counter. "One for the road," he said. The clerk brightened. "Oh yeah? Where to?" The Colonel's face twitched. "Really?" he said, with eyes popping. He took a deep breath. At length he said, "Fine. in no particular order, and this is just preliminary, subject to change. Nevada, California, Arizona, and then I guess after that, Kansas, Florida, New Jersey. No, wait. So, is the District of Columbia considered a state? This has been The Colonel of Colorado, a short story, written by Marcus Lassard, narrated by Dan Stieber. Copyright 2019 by Marcus Lassard. Production copyright 2020 by Marcus Lassard.